Hi, everybody. Welcome to the OnStage Black Theater podcast. We're so excited to be here and wish you all a very happy Halloween coming up. It's going to be so fun. And I am theater critic Rachel Wagner, and Jacqueline Collier is here.
Hello, so excited to be here. So excited that we get to spend Halloween
Yeah.
together with, I don't think we will have revealed our secret costume.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. You definitely want to follow along on our social medias and stuff because we've got a theater themed costume in the works.
Yep, theater themed BFF costume coming at you.
Yes. So we are excited today, though. It's interesting. So we did our best song we covered over 20 musicals and our best and worst song. And we got comments, someone saying, "Oh, these girls are so milk toast," was their comment. And because we didn't like go into deep dive because we wanted to cover so many different shows for that episode, right?
Yeah.
And so today we're going deep dive.
You want deep, we'll go deep.
Yeah, that's right. Today we are talking about Sweeney Todd, and it's interesting because just by chance we our deep dive episodes, like solo for one show, have both been Sondheims that we've done. And we did kind of a deep dive for Matilda and Annie, a compare contrast, and we talked quite a bit about Mamma Mia in our jukebox episode, but our solo, is this a good show episode, have been both about Sondheim, which is interesting. So y'all want to check out our Into the Woods discussion. But yeah, today we're talking about Sweeney Todd. And particularly, we both watched the 1982 filming version that's on Broadway HD with Angela Lansbury. It's mostly, we'll talk more about it, but it's mostly it's a lot of the original cast and staging and everything. So it's kind of fun to see it.
Yeah, and Rachel, I think Sondheim really lends itself to a deep dive. So I think it's really fun because even if like with Into the Woods, love it or hate it or anywhere in between, there's lots to talk about.
Yeah, it's really true. And like we could and probably will eventually do an episode on Company.
Yes.
Things, because there is a lot to talk about on so many levels, not just thematically and character wise and story wise, but also just the way he writes his song. He uses a lot of minor keys and he uses a lot of interesting chord structures. And I'm not an expert musician by any means, but what he does as far as even just the songwriting is very unique, and you don't get with your typical Broadway show.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's so interesting because I really feel like it's this interesting thing where Sondheim really writes actors musicals because you can really like dig in, but also like they're very complicated songs as well. So you do have to do a job sing her.
Really hard. Yeah, really hard to sing. And that certainly is true with Sweeney Todd, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Now, is this a show that you've seen live?
So the first time I saw Sweeney Todd was when I was still in high school. One of my good friends who was in all the high school plays with me, he went to college nearby and he was playing Anthony in a production of Sweeney Todd. So I saw it at the collegiate level, and that was my first exposure to Sweeney Todd. That was before I watched the Angela Lansbury version, before I had seen it anywhere else. And then I saw the most recent revival on Broadway with Anna Lee Ashford, and Josh Groban was out that day, so I saw his understudy.
Yeah. So what do you think?
Okay, I think Anna Lee Ashford is a gem of a human being, an incredible performer. She's so funny. Like, I love watching her. I thought she nailed the comedy aspect of Mrs. Lovett. For me, it was a hard entry point to get in there because I feel like in my mind, she's too young to be Mrs. Lovett, and she's also like, this, not that Mrs. Lovett can't be that, but she's also this like blonde, young, cute, like charismatic person. And I don't think she quite, with Mrs. Lovett for me, didn't quite hit like the desperation, the patheticness,
Mm.
feeling like sorry for her and that she's hopeless and like desperately in love. Like I didn't really get all of that. So that was an interesting journey for me. Did you what
What?
versions have you seen? Because you've seen the Angela Lansbury, right?
Well, I mean, just the pro
Yeah.
shot.
Yeah.
So So how was Josh Groban? I've heard mixed
So
reviews.
I saw his understudy
Oh, okay.
with Paul Jordan Jansen, and he was fantastic. And in fact, for me, like I think Josh Groban is great. Like I'm not a Josh Groban super fan, and I'm not like anti Josh Groban. But again, kind of like with Annalee Ashford, I was like, oh, interesting choice. Like I know he can sing the heck out of it, but I also don't see him as a Sweeney. The guy who played the John Paul Jansen, again, a little young for my taste for Sweeney, but he really worked for me type wise
Mm.
and what he brought to the role. He really worked for me. What have you heard about Josh Groban? I'm curious.
Well, I just heard that he didn't bring that like grittiness that you want for Sweeney. You want him to be kind of uh he was a little bit pretty, for like the
Yep.
role, and then not like scary, and didn't bring that kind of Tim Leninger, friend of mine. That's what he basically said in his review, that it just didn't capture like the of the character.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that. And I can imagine what it was like with him and Annalee Ashford, because I don't think that I love the way you said like the grit. And I don't think she got that. She didn't get there for me with Love It.
Mm.
And I can imagine that Josh Groban definitely didn't get there. So the two of them playing opposite each other, honestly, it kind of turns it into a different show.
Yeah. I can see that, which is interesting. I also heard that and we'll talk about in a second, but that I heard that the production design was a little bit odd, the way that they had the platforms, I guess, and
Yeah,
things. Yeah.
it didn't bother me, but it definitely felt like it took me a second to get used to. And then like once I was like, oh, okay, this is the lay of the land, I was fine. But it did sort of take me like a second
Yeah.
to be like, oh, okay, this is what's going on.
Well, the first time that I saw Sweeney Todd was, remember when Josh was on, and Josh Egbert, and we talked about him being Judge Turpin
Yes.
in their production. It was West Valley Performing Arts, which is a theater in the Round, and it was an absolutely amazing production. I mean, the way that they did the chair and the shoot and the everything was really cool. And um just they just all the singing was absolutely phenomenal. The acting was really good. I mean, that you could get this from just a community theater was really shocking. And I said in my review at the time, I said everything was top rate, from the production design to the costuming. I've never seen the show performed before, but it's hard for me to imagine it being done much better. And J. Michael Bailey's wonderful, Sweeney Todd, and Light and Matern is fantastic as Mrs. Lovett. I also loved Rachel Bigler as Joanna, Thomas Brandley as Tobias Ragg. Every role was great, even smaller ones like Dan Rodolfo as Pirelli and Josh Egbert as Judge Turpin.
I love that you gave him a shout
Yeah,
out.
I was already a fan.
Already a fan even before he was on the pod.
Yes.
It's interesting that you say that, Rachel, because thinking back to when I saw it at the local college. So, me seeing this local college production, you seeing a community theater, I remember thinking that the way that they did the killings in the chair, I remember finding it really chilling. Like, look, that was my
Yeah.
first exposure to it. So, of course, you and I are talking about our first time really with this material, but I remember finding it really chilling, and it was almost like I don't want to say uber realistic, but there was something that was just like really haunting about it. Whereas in the Broadway production, the way they did the killings, and then they went down so far in the shoot that it almost was like almost comedic for me, which
Mm-hmm.
can work, but for me, that's not really what I want.
Yeah. So now I've seen it since this first time, and now I've seen it 3 other times. So I've seen the show 4 times total, and I've enjoyed every single time I've seen it. But the it's interesting, the production at the Grand, which is it's the local community college, but it's like a separate. They just perform at the community college. It's not a school production.
Oh,
Anyway, the Grand, they're very, very good, and it was a very talented production. Dallin Bayless was Sweeney, and he's Broadway veteran. He's really good. So it was a very talented production, but they got a little bit carried away with their shoot, with their chair thing. I think sometimes these productions can get a little lost in that. And one of the problems was, so they had this, like, it was 2 stories, and they had the chair, and then they had the chute going down and all this stuff. And so a ton of the action was pretty high up in this little platform. And so it actually kind of, even though it was impressive, the build and everything, it we were so separated from all the action as an audience. And it's a huge theater, the Grand, it fits its name because it's a huge mammoth, so it's already somewhat separate. You're already feeling somewhat, so, and then having them way up high, it just kind of made it less emotionally resonant. Whereas like this Angela Lansbury version, it's pretty sparse, it's pretty simple, and you feel, it's easier to feel an intimate connection with the characters and what's happening, I think.
I think that's so wonderfully put. Yeah, the Angela Lansbury definitely has that intimate feel. It has that grit. It has everything I want Sweeney Todd to have. And to your point about the show with the Grand, it sounds like it was a very similar setup to the Broadway production. It being,
Yeah.
and like there were stairs that they were climbing, which was interesting when they were trying to, doing the whole like looking for people who's in there. But I agree. I felt already I was back pretty far, because tickets are expensive. Already I was back
Yeah.
pretty far. So like you said, it's a huge theater, you're removed, but then there was just that additional layer. And it's almost like just because you have the money to do something a certain way, maybe doesn't mean you should do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we always want to make sure that we're like getting that emotional connection between the audience and the actors, you know?
Yeah.
So even if it's something like that's more spectacle than story, something like when we saw Back to the Future, or when I saw Starlight Express or something like that, like, yeah, those are more spectacle than they are story, but you still got to have that something that sort of sparks wonder, or gets us invested in what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes me think of the song from Damn Yankees, Heart, when all the baseball players are singing, you gotta have
Oh
heart.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, you have to have that thing. And even in Sweeney Todd, if it's the grit or the darkness, like all of that ties into the heart of it. And that's why I also think like even at the end of the production, at least of the Broadway one, I wasn't as invested because I didn't feel like I cared about the characters as much. I'm curious in the productions that you've seen, like the age range of
Yeah.
Lovett and Sweeney.
Yeah. So with I'm trying to think. Okay, so for a lot of times the Love It will be a bit older, seems like, than Sweeney. And most of the time when I've seen it, they've been closer in age. The What was interesting this last time that I saw it at Draper Stork, it was a very impressive production, especially by this tiny little theater. And I gave it a good review, except for the only one that didn't connect with me emotionally was the Mrs. Lovett. And sometimes they the actors sometimes the actors can lean a little bit too much into the accent and a little
Yeah.
too much into the, and so that they're harder to understand. This so again, it's another thing that kind of breaks your relationship with the character if you're not kind of understanding what she's saying and and vibing with the performance. And that was an issue that I had with this most recent one, is that she just needed to enunciate better. And that would, but she was very talented, but that was just my feedback, that she could have enunciated better.
Well, and that's hard because it takes you out of it, especially because even with dialects, even when they're super spot on, it takes you a minute to adjust in theater to, okay, this is a dialect that
Yeah.
I'm hearing. Um, I'm curious why, even with the Broadway production, when Sutton Foster and Aaron Tveit came in, like
Yeah.
even they also feel very young to me. And
Yeah.
also, like, I would have loved to have seen Sutton Foster's Mrs. Lovett. I'm sure she crushed it in so many ways. But again, these aren't the people that I would, and I'm all for more expansive casting, opening our eyes up to different ways that we can cast people. But I don't think that's necessarily what this is, because these are people that are very standard, like always get the roles, or good looking, or always going to be playing that stuff. So I don't view that as like an off type thing. I just view it as
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, we're
Doesn't
doing that.
It's not like a deal breaker. Like the enunciation wasn't a deal breaker for me. It just hmm, not perfect. That's
Right,
fine.
right.
you know but let's dive in a little bit and let's talk about the show itself. I mean, as a whole, how would you feel as a whole about the show? Is it a favorite of yours? Where do you stand on it?
I Sweeney Todd, I wouldn't say it's in my top 10, but it's definitely in my top 20.
Okay.
I think that um for my taste in musical theater, I not necessarily that I like something that's light, but I like something that has a little bit more like hope at the end.
Mm,
But the songs are amazing. The characters are very interesting, the story's compelling. And I remember the first time seeing it being like, this is something that is completely unique that I've never seen in a musical before. And
yeah.
I think that that makes it really like a modern day classic. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably, well, I was gonna say it's probably my favorite Sondheim, but I think Company, I still like Company better. So that would be my favorite, and then this would be my second favorite Sondheim. I mean, if you're not counting West Side Story, which
Right.
I usually, so that would be my third favorite. But anyway, I do really admire it, and I think it's entertaining, especially around this time of the year. And I have some issues though, I think, with it. I particularly think that first act is pretty slow. It takes forever to get. I mean, of course, you don't get to the pies until the final song of that first act. And there's a lot in that first act that I'm like I really don't need the I really don't need the contest and like pretty much everything with Pirelli, magical
Mhm.
elixir, everything with Pirelli. Like I mean, you always have to get to the point where Pirelli's blackmailing him, but I feel like we could have gotten there way sooner. I feel like you could basically start this musical with Pirelli's death. You could, you know, I don't know. I think that first act, but then the second act is just like boom. It is like there's not a wasted moment in that second act. It's boom, 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 and especially that final sequence where they bring it's quite brilliant. Where they bring back almost every song is reprised in that final like 10 minutes that you have is brilliant, and it is so unique and fresh, and so I will always opt for seeing it. I think it's very entertaining, and I yeah, so I do enjoy it, but I do think that first act is kind of slow.
I feel as though that yes, I can see the first act being slow and the second act not a wasted moment. And for me, the second act feels, because probably the first act is so slow, it feels like whiplash. Like it almost feels like it for me, like it's going a little too fast. Like, okay, here we go, like sprint to the end. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
it's
true.
interesting. The Prelly stuff, I totally agree with that. Also, like, and I think I mentioned this on another pod because it's definitely just not my favorite song, but the Greenfinch and Linnet Bird, I feel like it goes on
It's
for,
really long.
it's so long.
Yeah.
Like, is it just me or is it that long?
No, I agree.
Like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, but it
And then
sticks in
pretty
my
much
head.
that whole section from after you first get introduced to Sweeney Todd at the beginning and Mrs. Lovett, and then so pretty much all the way from uh from yeah, the Greenfinch all the way through the contest. I don't know. It's not that great.
Which is interesting because I think this opening is killer, pun intended. When they're like, I mean, I get so excited. This
Yeah.
opening, like the
Worst
attendance
Pies in
scale.
London is great.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so you get a great introduction to Sweeney and to Lovett, and then it kind of goes off here, and and it's fine. It's fine. It's just like it just makes that first act feel a little slow and meandering.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Even
Uh,
it's funny though, even the songs that are kind of like slow and meandering and I think like not as
uh-huh.
entertaining. Greenfinch gets stuck in my head, and so is Try Pirelli's Miracle Elixir. That's always in my head too.
Yeah, that is kind of an airworm, isn't
It is.
it? Well, this just for a little backstory. So this show appeared on Broadway 1979. It opened on Broadway, and it was based on these Victorian fiction serials, basically that were known as penny dreadfuls was what they were called. And so a story called The String of Pearls was published in a weekly magazine during the winter of 1846 to 47. Set in 1785, the story featured as its principal villain a certain Sweeney Todd and included all the plot elements used in later versions. The murderous barber's story was turned into a play before the ending had even been revealed in print. An expanded edition appeared in 1850 and an American version in 1852, and then a new play in 1865. By the 1870s, Sweeney Todd was a familiar character to most Victorians, which I think is kind of interesting.
That is interesting. It's like they just knew who Sweeney Todd was.
Yeah, I mean, I always find that fascinating because I think it's easy to like put past generations in this like really safe box. Oh, they only like G-rated because of the Hays Code and some other things. And then you watch pre-code films or you watch, some of these shows and stuff, and it's like, oh whoa, they were very racy. Like it's not just, I don't know, it's just sort of funny that we do that.
Yeah, it's almost like, yeah, definitely putting them in a box and then actually examining the material from then. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay.
Yeah, like I remember I went to Pompeii and I hated Pompeii. It's not for me, but we went to Pompeii and there's like so much pornography in Pompeii.
Right?
Tons, like tons. And and I don't know, it's just kind of funny that like so especially like sometime like the Victorian, which seems so like tight and stuffed shirt and proper and everything like that, we kind of and in here, they was very popular. Everybody knew Sweeney Todd, everyone knew the story, everyone, which I just find kind of fascinating.
I think that oftentimes, like the tighter laced people are, or the more uptight or the more held in, they're just waiting to bust out.
Yeah, it's true. So then there was a play by Christopher Bond in 1970 called Sweeney Todd, which introduced a psychological backstory and a motivation to Todd's crimes. In Bond's reincarnation of the character, Todd was the victim of a ruthless judge who exiled him to Australia and raped his young wife, driving her mad. And it says Stephen Sondheim first conceived of a musical version of the story in 1973 after he saw Bond's take on the story at Theatre Royal Stratford East. So I think that's kind of interesting too.
Yeah, I never heard that, what the inspiration is, and how fascinating that Sondheim saw this and was like, "That's a musical."
Yeah. I mean, and it is one unique thing about Sondheim is that he did both the music and the lyrics for most of these shows, unlike except for West Side Story, obviously. But he did both, and then the book is by Hugh Wheeler here in for this musical, and says here that says Bond's sophisticated plot and language significantly elevated the lurid nature of the tale. Sondheim once observed it had a weight to it because Bond wrote certain characters in blank verse. He also infused it with plot elements from Jacobean tragedy and the Count of Monte Cristo. He was able to take all these disparate elements that had been in existence rather duly for 100 and some odd years and make them into a first-rate play. So that, yeah, I almost wish that I could see the play someday, because that sounds
I'd
interesting.
be I'd be very interested to
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, he says, what I did to Chris's play is more than enhance it. I had a feeling that it would be a new animal. The effect it had Stratford East in London and the effect it had in New York are two entirely different effects, even though it's the same play. It was essentially charming over there because they don't take Sweeney Todd seriously. Our production was larger in scope. Hal Prince gave it an epic sense, a sense that this was a man of some size instead of just a nutcase. The music helps to give it that dimension, which is interesting. Of course, Hal Prince was the director,
Yeah.
and he worked with Sondheim on so many of his productions. Merrily We Roll Along, with Company, so many different stuff.
I'm curious, that's very interesting. I had not thought about sort of the implications of over there, it being not taken as seriously because there's all this lore around Sweeney Todd already.
Uh-huh.
Of course, I've never had that. I always feel like he's such an imposing figure and there's a darkness and it's very easy to take him seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting because I was just watching yesterday the video by Mickey Joe Theater, who's a great YouTuber, so good, so insightful. And he was going over all the different reviews of the Broadway new revival of Sunset Boulevard and comparing it to the reactions at the West End.
Mm-hmm.
He loved the show on the West End. He hasn't seen it on Broadway, but it was really, really interesting to see the difference between the reviews. Sometimes even from the same publication, different critic, but like the New York Times review of the London production versus the New York Times review of the Broadway. And so I think that you can still see that difference even today. That the Broadway crowd is just a very different crowd than the London crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting too. It's like just culturally how things are so different
Yeah.
from London to New York.
Yeah. So so it premiered in 1979, and of course it went on to be a phenomenon. So it won the Tony Award for Best Musical, Best Book, Best Original Score, Best Leading Actor Performance, Len Carew, Best Leading Actress, Angela Lansbury, Best Direction of a Musical, Harold Prince, Best Scenic Design, Eugene Lee, Best Costume Design, Fran Lee, and then it was nominated for Lighting Design, but didn't win. So that was the only one it didn't win, but 6, 7, 8 Tonys. That's pretty amazing.
I mean, that's epic.
Yeah.
That's an epic run. 8 Tonys.
Yeah. And so then the Angela Lansbury filmed Pro Shot was actually the first U.S. national tour, and it has George Hearn playing Sweeney Todd. And I was doing some research. He's still alive. He's 90 years old. George Hearn. Yeah. So
Be happy.
yeah. And then it has Angela Lansbury's Mrs. Lovett. It has Chris Grondahl as Anthony Hope, Betsy Jocelyn as Johanna, Ken Jennings, that he was in the original Broadway as Tobias Ragg. So that's a repeat.
Yeah.
Edmund Leindeck as Judge Turpin. He was also in the original Broadway cast. Yeah, that's the only other repeat. But what did you think of this pro shot of this cast in general?
I mean, I love this. Angela Lansbury was one of my favorites of all time. I started when I was little watching her on Murder, She Wrote. And this is one of those that it's like if I could time travel to places in time, I would take you and me to see this in person.
Yeah. Well, that's what's so great about pro shots is that we do, at least, we have it so we can enjoy it.
Please, more pro shots. Please, please, please. Because I mean, completely for me, this is like, she is Mrs. Lovett to me, and the standard by which I will think of it, and really just like she fully encompasses that character. I think, to what you said before, I think this production has so much grit. It feels very intimate. It feels heartbreaking. It's also funny. Like, I just think that this production is firing on all cylinders, and what a true blessing to have the pro shot. Like you said, like it is incredible. It's as close to being there as we could get.
Yeah. And I was just surprised how sparse it is, how simple it is, because I've seen these productions that get quite elaborate and complicated, but it's pretty just a bare stage for a lot of this production.
For me, I really like, I mean, look, I'm totally charmed and enchanted by, like, when we went to Back to the Future and when the spectacle is part of it. I love that aspect of theater, but I very much enjoy seeing a simple two-hander in a black box. I really, if the acting is good, if the storytelling is there, for me, I think we both have really good imaginations. I think we can transport ourselves in that way. And I think that this cast and this material really lent itself to the sparseness. I thought really even enhanced it.
Yeah. And what's interesting is the original Lovett and Sweeney were evidently quite involved in the development of the character. So it's they really are fundamental. So it's interesting to watch, particularly Angela Lansbury in this, and see her just like own the character,
I always think it's interesting too when a musical, like if you're doing a reading of a new musical, same with a play, but like if you're thinking about like developing these characters and how there's such a beauty to the person who originated the role, their stamp is always on it in one way or another. Which I think is just so amazing.
So it said he gave her the key to the character, and she said, "I want Mrs. Lovett to have a musical hall character." And she said that she'd grown up in British music halls, and that was the key to her kind of getting it. And then, so I think that's really interesting because, like you were saying, with some of the other versions you've seen, they don't capture that kind of manic energy that I think Angela Lansbury is able to tap into, which is so satisfying.
Yeah, manic is such a great word for Rachel, because I think that some of what I saw with Annalee Ashford was like, oh, you're a quirky girl, which is great. Again, she's so funny. I love Annalee Ashford. Sorry, what's that?
There's a desperation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's what mania and being manic has, the desperation, that being quirky, it doesn't. And I think that it's hard to have that missing in Lovett.
Yeah. She said that cuckoo style of playing Mrs. Lovett, that was pretty much Angela. She invented that character. That's what actually Crow said. And then she said, I just ran with it. The wide openness of my portrayal had to do with my sink or swim attitude toward it. I just figured, hell, I've done everything else on Broadway. I might as well go with Mrs. Lovett.
Might as well.
Yeah. So I think that's very effective. In in George Hearn, he would go on to win 2 Tony Awards. He won for La Cage aux Folles and for Sunset Boulevard.
Oh,
So yeah, he's very, very talented in this, and he is. I think he was great in this
yeah,
Pro Shop. Yeah,
fantastic.
and he won an Emmy for this. It actually didn't get up for Emmys until 1985.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. So it was released on home video, I think in VHS, early VHS in 1982, and then it was put on primetime or whatever in 1985, and that's when he won the Emmy in 1985.
You
So,
know, it's just you know, like I think movie musicals are great, but there's nothing like these pro shots. Like there's just nothing like it because you're getting it's
mhm.
like you're in the theater. I'm curious what you think of the have you seen the movie version of Sweeney Todd?
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. So, movie version, it came out in 2007, directed by Tim Burton, and it had a screenplay by John Logan based on, of course, the musical. And I have mixed feelings about this production. I overall like it, especially when you compare it to other Tim Burton films around this time. Like he had a long stretch of practically unwatchable movies for me. I mean, like his Dark Shadows is so bad, and like his I hate his Alice in Wonderland.
Oh
I
yeah.
Just a bunch that I hit. The Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children was one of the most boring films I've ever seen in my life. It He was just not doing it for me for a long time.
It's funny
And,
that you say it was one of the most boring films because I was babysitting at the time and fell asleep in the theater and I was like, I guess I'm just tired. Like I was like, it has nothing to do with the movie. I guess I'm tired,
no,
but that's making me think that maybe it
no,
was the movie.
it was not just you. It was, I don't know. I just, and I'd read the book. I was ready for it. I thought, oh, this is going to be great. And I mean, his Planet of the Apes is horrible. Like he just had a whole bunch in there that were not for me, at least that's for sure. And so this is one of his better films of the 2000s, I would say. It has great atmosphere, great style. I think the performances are really good. I mean, you got an Oscar nomination for Johnny Depp. I think Alan Rickman is really good as the judge. I think where you run into problems is with Helena Bonham Carter. A lot of people don't like her as Mrs. Lovett. And then the singing isn't the best.
Yeah. You know, Helena Bonham Carter and Johnny Depp, it, it's interesting because I just feel like when I remember hearing about the casting, I was like, yeah, of course. Like I wasn't excited about the casting. I
Yeah.
was like, it seems so on the nose that
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't like, ooh, I can't wait to see those two dig in. I was like, oh, they're both going to be doing the thing that they do. Um,
I mean, she was fine. I am like the world's biggest softie when it comes to musical movies. I don't know what it is, but I just really usually enjoy almost all of them on some level. But so she was okay. She was fine for me. But yeah, like none of the singing like blew me away.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's kind of
which is
funny here on
understandable. I
this
feel
Wikipedia. On the Wikipedia, it says it's since its release, the film has widely been assessed as one of the greatest musicals of the 21st century, which just makes me laugh. I'm like, yeah, what's it comparing to? I mean, okay, it's not as good as Chicago, it's not as good as La La Land, but like, yeah, I guess it's better than Cats. It's better than
I love thinking of like who's writing the Wikipedia updates
the
too.
greatest musical films of the 21st century.
You're like, okay, cool. What actually are we comparing it to?
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
That's really funny to me. But I do love Alan Rickman in this. Like, I mean, he made such a great villain. He was so good. Whether it's Snape, whether it's of course Hans Gruber, he's so good.
Yeah, Alan Rickman's so great in it. And that was one of the casting choices that when I heard it, I was like, yes, I can't wait to see
Yeah.
this. Whereas Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter, I was like, yeah, they'll be good. I feel like I've seen them kind of do this thing before. Whereas Alan Rickman, even though we've seen him as the villain, he just always brought something that was just so fresh
Yeah.
to every performance.
Yeah. He really always delivered.
Yeah.
Even in something like Sense and Sensibility, he always delivered every time.
Oh, Love
Yeah.
Actually, which was he was a
Yeah.
villain,
Oh,
but a different
yeah.
kind of villain.
Yeah, it's true. He is a villain. Oh my gosh. And I mean, I've said it many times before, but I would have nominated Emma Thompson for an Oscar for that. She's so good in Love Actually.
Girl,
She
when
sees
I
that
tell you,
necklace. Oh my god.
oh, and look, I get that that's not because of the kind of movie it is, even though it was like a very popular movie. It's not like one of those movies that, gets these Oscar wins, but it really, and I feel like we should start looking at things like that because it is a transcendent performance. Like, and then the way she pulls it together and goes out, and I'm just like, girl, she was absolutely nailing it.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about some of the songs. We haven't really dived into that yet. I mean, overall, I guess we should say overall, would you recommend the movie? How do you feel about overall about the movie?
I think it's worth seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's worth seeing just for the production design and I think it tells the story like pretty well.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah.
well. Like yeah, the singing isn't unbelievable, but it's like I would say like watch this pro shot and then
Yes.
watch the movie and you're fine. But let's talk about some of the songs. We haven't really dived into the songs that much. So I think that the first song, well, so we open up with No Place Like London and then The Worst Pies in London. And of course we've got the Ballad of Sweeney Todd kind of as our continuing riff throughout the whole piece. And what do you think of some of those moments?
I mean, the Ballad of Sweeney Todd, like for me, I always like I get like this excited feeling in my stomach. Like I'm like, yes, we're
Yeah.
doing this. So that I really, really love. And I think it really like grounds the show. Just like, oh, I kind of know I'm in the right mind frame when I hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does draw you in. And then the fact that you continue to have that reprise
Yes.
throughout the show kind of helps provide like a narrative through line to
Mhm.
everything that really
Exactly.
works quite well. And I do also like for The Worst Pies in London that immediately immerses you into her character and you get some of that humor and sarcasm and the and everything. So this is not just gritty for gritty's sake, you know.
Yeah, and it's a cool, fun way to like the worst pies in London when you think about it. And then when they start putting people in the pies, then they taste amazing. And you're like, oh,
Right.
the fun thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So then we have like this long kind of section with introducing us to the sort of the community elements a little bit with Pirelli and everything. I think the best song in that section is probably Joanna, just because I like the song isn't like amazing, but I do think that is a beautiful melody. To
Yeah.
see
That's
you, Joanna. Like it's such a pretty melody and it's probably up there as far as Sondheim's prettiest songs.
yeah, and I think that in a show with a lot of like darkness and grit and stuff that moves, I think that is a welcome break
Yeah,
from.
I'd agree. I'd agree. So then it kind of keeps going until Pirelli's death, and that's a big moment, obviously. And we get a Ballad of Sweeney Todd reprise. That's our third one after that. And then we have the Johanna Mea Culpa that Judge Turpin sings, where you find out he's going to try to marry her, which is just so gross. It's so gross.
I mean,
Woo.
ugh.
Yeah. And then we get Kiss Me with Johanna and Anthony and ladies and their sensitivities. Kiss Me, that whole section. Judge Turpin and Beetle. Yeah, talking about he's gonna basically force her to marry him and that's when we get Pretty Woman, which is a very like key song in the show. So he has the opportunity to kill Judge there.
Yeah.
And which is interesting. And, like, what do you think it is that stops him? Because he's already killed Pirelli at this point. He's got the judge, he's got the judge under the knife. He could easily do it. What do you think stops him there from doing it?
That's a great question I've thought about that I don't have an answer to, except that, okay, like you would think, I mean, I say this as someone who's not a murderer, and you're not either, that the first kill would be the hardest. Sure, because then you've like crossed over.
Yeah.
But I almost think that there's this sort of line between like the Pirelli situation where it was like in some ways impulsive and everything, and then now being like, oh, am I just someone who kills people?
Right.
That's the hesitation.
Because he could kind of
like,
justify with Pirelli, because Pirelli was blackmailing him. And he's not like serial killer at this point.
yes.
Yeah.
What do you think about the
yeah I think that that's it, is that he hadn't crossed that bridge yet. And it's not until that's what the Epiphany song, that's what makes that such an epiphany, is that, oh my gosh, I'm going to become this person.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so then a little priest in Epiphany, that's where we get her coming up with the plan for the pies. And that's where we leave the first act. And that is an incredible sequence. Those two songs are really great.
So good.
Yeah. So then we start Act 2. And like I said, Act 2 just is like jam-packed. It's interesting because there are so many shows that really are Act 2 heavy. I was talking with Chris about Wicked, and I would say Wicked is the reverse. Wicked is very, I think, Act 1 heavy.
Yes.
Almost all of the good songs are in the first act, and then the second act, aside from For Good and a few other things, are most of that is reprises in the second act. So that's why I'm like, how are you gonna make a whole second movie? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. Like, what? And so
I don't get that.
Yeah, but there it's interesting to see. I bet we could do an interesting episode of like Act 1 heavy shows and Act 2 heavy shows.
That's a fun idea.
Yeah. Because I definitely think that this is the Act 2 is basically perfect. I mean, there's not a dull moment in the house.
Yeah, it goes.
Yeah.
What do you think, Rachel, for you, we should take Act 1 of Into the Woods and Act 2 of Sweeney Todd and just make it a sort of...
Well, what if I watched Act 1 of Into the Woods and Act 2 of Sweeney Todd? I'm just gonna find that together.
You're like, this is it. This is the pinnacle for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's why Company is the best, because it's pretty solid throughout.
Company is really solid.
It's really good. Yeah. But yeah, so we start out with God, That's Good. And so the customers, the pies, a big hit. Yeah.
So funny.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if I was going to say a miss in Act 2, maybe By the Sea, they would be the weakest song. But it does kind of tell you a lot about Mrs. Lovett and her desperation and how deluded she is. She thinks that they're like basically a couple at this point.
Yeah, it's funny. For some reason, I really like By the Sea because it's that delusion. It's that delusion that you're like, oh, baby girl. Oh my gosh, you don't even know. Like,
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think it's particularly like, it's not a song I'm gonna like put on while I'm cleaning and listen to, but in the show, I always enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think of Tobias Ragg as a character?
I find Tobias really compelling in the sense of his relationship to Mrs. Lovett and the Not While I'm Around. And that to me is really like, all of that is fascinating to me, and that connection. I've seen Tobias played to varying degrees of success slash like intrigue and being interesting to me. But I find that like that the Not While I'm Around always really brings me and sells me on him. What do you think of him?
Yeah, I've seen it in versions where he's a young man, like when he's basically like a teenager. And that was in the Broadway, this recent Broadway one, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember who plays Tobias when you saw it?
Ooh.
It wasn't the Stranger Things guy, was it?
Um, no, I actually don't remember who it was. Um, Let me see Broadway bias. I wonder if it was um no, I don't know who it I wish I remembered who
I
it was
do
'cause
I prefer the take of him as a child slash teen more than I prefer like in this pro shot with him being basically like mentally handicapped adult. I that can be a little it can just be a little one note, I think, at play or portraying that kind of character. Where is if he's a child, I don't know. I feel like that adds a little bit more of an interesting layer than if he's like, I don't know, does that make sense?
completely. I also I agree with you in that I feel like that has to be handled with a certain level of care, and I don't think there's enough time to really do that given everything else we have going on. And yeah, I
Especially because he's the one that at the because what happens at the ending, I think, too. And there's
exactly.
sometimes this idea that people that are mentally handicapped are like dangerous or violent or there's something so I always get nervous when that's sort of leaned into it all.
Yeah, I agree. I actually, except for the pro shot, have always seen it as like one time it was a boy who was like probably around 12, then 16, then another time it was a college student, but he was playing it like a kid. So like I definitely prefer that take.
Yeah, and like I said, this Tobias on the shot was Ken Jennings is his name, and he was in the original Broadway, so that was how it was originally cast, which is interesting.
That is interesting.
Mhm.
Huh.
Yeah. And so but yeah, no, I think Not While I'm Around is a breath of fresh air. I think we need that to just have like a calming moment and to give some humanity to the Mrs. Lovett, especially,
Yeah.
he's killing all these people and things are just getting more and more crazy. Just to have this like peaceful, calming song, I think is really needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like the sort of equivalent of in this show, No One Is Alone.
Yeah.
It's like that, okay, here we are. And that's why I think again
Yeah.
it works much better when it is a kid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this final sequence has like a bunch of the songs, including the Ballad of Sweeney Todd, City on Fire, and it just it's practically there's barely any dialogue. It's just like all music for that last mostly music for the last 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, it's very operetta style, just music
Yeah,
going,
it is.
which
And
I enjoy.
I'm so mad at myself because Utah Opera just did Sweeney Todd and I missed it. I didn't get to it, but I would have loved to have seen like an opera take on it. And I heard it was fantastic.
Yeah,
But
I think that's great.
but yeah, I missed it. But yeah, it does have an opera quality. It really does. I agree.
Yeah.
This part and so Mrs. Lovett, she sends Tobias down into the basement and tells him he's got to grind it 3 times, and that's such a such a gross moment when he finds the fingernail and the hair. He's like,
You just feel it.
yeah, it's so gross, but it's kind of funny too.
Gross but funny, for
Yeah,
sure.
and the inspector comes and he's trying to because he's like the neighbors are complaining, they can smell everything, and so she's trying to kind of distract the inspector, and this is, oh, I don't have the key, all this stuff. And then what happens is so there's been this beggar woman. We haven't really talked about the beggar woman throughout. This beggar woman, she sings throughout, and so Anthony goes and rescues Joanna from the asylum, and he's gonna bring her to he's gonna bring her to the barbershop, and it basically, like, one after another, you have the murder of Judge Turpin and by Sweeney, and you have him, he ends up murdering the beggar woman, and you have Johanna hiding in the barbershop, and Sweeney doesn't know, but she's seen all of this happening around there, and so it's just, it is a lot happening, but it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I remember the first time I saw it when he murdered the Baker woman and then the reveal, and I was like, like I
Yeah.
should have seen it coming, but I didn't at all.
Yeah, so then he murders the so then he sees the beggar woman, and he realizes that, oh my gosh, it's his Lucy. He just killed Lucy. And he is furious with Mrs. Lovett because she knew all along and she didn't tell him.
Because again, she was delusional and she thought they were in a relationship. But
Yeah.
also, like, dude, I kind of blame you because, like, you should have known, and also, like, you're just gonna kill like a beggar woman. Like, what is
Yeah.
wrong with
Yeah, that just shows how, like, insane everything got. And so then they did this very good, I thought, in the pro shot. They're dancing with Mrs. Levitt, and she tries to say, like, oh, you know, we belong together, you really do love me, and he dances her right into the oven.
Right into the oven, baby?
Yeah,
Burn.
that was good. That was very good.
That was really, really good.
Yeah, and meanwhile Tobias is freaking out because there's now multiple bodies down there. He's like,
Just
what's
down there.
happening? Yeah.
Just hanging out.
Yeah. And so he ends up being the one that basically everybody's dead by the end except for Tobias.
Yeah. Which I feel like I was like, yeah, like that's justice. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like at this point, yeah, the killing of the beggar woman, that was just so upsetting. Like, of course, we have all these murders throughout the thing, but most of them can feel justified, or we don't know a lot about the characters. But then it's like seeing the blatant disregard for human life of this unhoused person. It's just like,
Mhm.
and then of course, it's like,
Especially with Mrs. Lovett, that she would be so obsessed with Sweeney Todd that she wouldn't tell him his Lucy's there.
like,
It's just so sad and so sick.
yeah, heartbreaking and sick. That's exactly
Mhm.
right.
Yeah. And so that was all very, very effective. And of course, Johanna and Anthony end up, surviving, and Tobias, and then we get our final, the Ballad of Sweeney Todd, and we get our bows and everything, and that's the end of the story. It doesn't go well for for them.
But
But
we'll still see it any chance we get.
yes. So that is Sweeney Todd. Hopefully this is enough of a deep dive for our friend Mr. Commenter. Hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, it was a dude?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Of course it was. Hi, friend.
Hi, friend. Let us know what you think of Sweeney Todd. What versions you've seen over the years. Like I said, it has revived 3 times on Broadway, including the most recent version. So let us know what you think of Sweeney Todd, where you stand on it, what you think of this pro shot. that you can watch on Broadway HD. What you think of it. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. Even if we disagree, we still love your comments. So please
It's
keep
fun.
them coming. Yeah. And make sure you check out all of our episodes of the podcast. We got our playlist for the OnStage Blog Theater podcast, and then all the good articles on OnStage Blog on the website. Make sure you take a look at that. And Jax, where can people find you?
Jacqueline Collier on Instagram.
And you can find me at rachelsreviewstheater.com and Rachel's Reviews all over the place. Make sure you check that out. And thanks so much, everybody, and have a happy Halloween. We'll talk to y'all later. Bye.
Bye.